bar for entertaining friends on a weekend. We've got you covered. For you loyal AM 560 listeners, we're also offering 60 months of interest-free financing. That's right, 5 years of free money towards your long overdue basement finishing project. Don't keep putting it off. You don't have to. It's time to get you and your family that extra living space you deserve. Check us out online at mymatrixbasement.com. That's mymatrixbasement.com.
If you're in HR, you're probably wearing a lot of hats. Recruiter, team builder, trainer, mediator, policymaker, and of course, paper pusher. But not anymore. Bamboo HR is the #1 HR software for small and medium businesses. It manages all your employee data easily and automates countless tasks, so you can focus on people, not paperwork. Bamboo HR frees you from spreadsheets, so you can do your real job, creating a great place to work. If the data shuffle and paperwork mountain have you ready to hang up all your hats, you're ready for Bamboo. If you handle HR records and paperwork, Bamboo HR is a dream. Let us free up your time and put your days of pushing paperwork behind you, so you can focus on the people and making your company a great place to work for everyone. Try PC Magazine's top pick for HR software free today. Just go to bamboohr.com/HR. This is a limited offer, only available to radio listeners at bamboohr.com/HR. That's bamboohr.com/HR.
When you need certainty in the home buying process with a loan that fits your life, Rocket can. Rocket Mortgage.
8:37, Team Hochberg Traffic Center time and Jim.
The travel time has come down a bit on the inbound Kennedy. Travel delays start around Canfield. It's 39 minutes from O'Hare to downtown this morning, 24 minutes from Montrose. In the express lanes, 26. They're jammed solid pretty much all the way in from Montrose. Outbound downtown to O'Hare, it's 23 minutes. Eden, 17 minutes. Lake Cook to the junction. Outbound 14. The Eisenhower. Delays start at North Avenue. It's 40 minutes, 390 to downtown. 27 from Wolf. Outbound 32 minutes to 390. Stevenson, 30 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive. The ride is 15 minutes from 95th to downtown. I-57, 11 minutes, I-80 to the Merge, Bishop 410. And that's traffic on this Monday. I'm Jim Talamonte. On AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. AM 560 Weather Center forecast. Sun and clouds, breezy this afternoon, with a high of 62. Currently 51. Next news at 9. And Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. You could win $12,000 towards the purchase of a new car or to cover your existing car payments just by doing acts of kindness. Learn more at 560theanswer.com/kindness.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So we've got two high-profile police-involved shootings. One that happened yesterday in Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis, that has now necessitated scrambling the National Guard there to quell the rioting and looting.
Yeah, 24 establishments, Verizon stores, big box stores were looted last night.
A 20-year-old named Dante Wright was stopped by police, his mom says, because he had an air freshener dangling from his rearview mirror, which is, a violation of code there. But that has not been confirmed by police in terms of why the stop occurred. Apparently, according to police, there was a warrant out for Mr. Wright, and something happened where he fled. The police officer shot, killed him, and the protesting ensued. There is a reported body and dash cam video that has not been made public yet, and on that score, we're waiting for the body cam video from the Adam Toledo police-involved shooting, the 13-year-old who was shot the other week. That is going to be released in the coming days to the public after apparently his family gets a chance to view it per Mayor Triple Threat. But it was described in court per the video by prosecutors. And the description includes that the 13-year-old Adam Toledo had a gun in his hand. There's gunpowder residue found on his hands, and when the police officer told him to drop the gun, he turned toward the police officer with the gun in his hand, and that's when he was shot.
And apparently, because I talked to somebody who saw the video, they said as he was turning, he was dropping the gun. So there's a still picture of not a gun in his right hand or his left hand, but the gun falling. But this is after a foot pursuit, Dan, that went on for a few blocks. So they're saying, drop your weapon, drop your weapon.
Well, we'll see about that. We'll see if the prosecutor's description checks out when the video is made public. But assuming it does, I'm not sure that it matters in terms of the politicians' posture towards police in the coming months, with the Chauvin trial ongoing and moving towards conclusion, and then more of those police officers that were former police officers that were involved with the George Floyd stop and death being tried after him. Our friend Jason Johnson, the former deputy commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department, now with the Legal Enforcement Defense Fund, notes, last year, the United States tallied more than 20,000 murders, the highest total since 1995. Preliminary FBI data for 2020 points to a 25% surge in murders, the largest single year-over-year increase since the agency began publishing uniform data in 1960. And he writes, policing is to blame, the lack of it. And this is where we're going, as Portland doesn't know whether it wants to follow Ted Wheeler's call for more money for the police to stop the just sort of ongoing violence and vandalism and Antifa control of parts of that city, or if they want to hire park rangers to replace police. Which way is this going to go? The way that it seems to be trending in big cities and not so big cities is police on their heels. No proactive policing. You're there to be a videographer. And we'll let social workers and park rangers do the peacekeeping. Well, let's talk to our friend Rafael Mangual about how that is likely to work out based on what we know from what we've seen, as Jason Johnson was describing in his op-ed in the USA Today. Rafael Mangual is a expert in this space. We've talked to him many times. He's a senior fellow and deputy director of legal policy at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, contributing editor of City Journal as well. Rafael, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Dan. Amy again.
So, what's there's, I guess, competing explanations for the spike in violent crime that Jason Johnson wrote about, that you wrote about in The Hill, over 2020 over 2019. How do you suss it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason's absolutely onto something with respect to the claim about policing playing a role here. I mean, one of the things that we've seen over the last several years, and this is predating the pandemic, which is sort of one of the go-to explanations for people who don't want to deal with the possibility that this crime problem is something that's going to be with us for a while. Is that if you look at the number of police officers in the country, that number has been dropping pretty steadily for at least 4 or 5 years prior to 2020. So between 2013 and 2016, the number of full-time sworn police officers in the country dropped by 3.2%. It's now significantly under 700,000 for the first time basically since the mid to late 90s. When you consider the fact that the U.S. population has increased during that period of time, the sort of ratio of civilians to police officers has become more unfavorable. I think it stands to reason, given all the research showing the connection between the number of police on the beat and crime, that a significant decline in the number of police officers leading up to 2020 sort of set the stage for the crime increase that we saw. And then, in 2020, the protests, not only caused an even more troubling spike in retirements, it also caused this, sort of tendency for cities to sort of placate the crowd and defund their departments to some degree. And in New York, we know, for example, that included canceling an entire academy class. It also had that same effect in Los Angeles, and I'm sure it did in other cities that experimented with this. So what you've got is, a sort of pre-existing trend of the number of police officers declining. You've got this new trend of protests kind of accelerating the rate at which people want to leave that job. You've also got this defund movement that is making it harder to sort of fill the gap, the growing hole that a lot of cities are experiencing. And then with the police officers that are left on the beat, I mean, they're getting spit at, cursed out, depicted in the media as evil murderers. It creates a sense of fear, I think, within departments that if they get out of their car and they're proactive and they do their job, they're putting themselves in undue risk. And if they make a mistake in the field, they're not going to get a fair shake. And that's not an entirely unreasonable reaction to all of this. And so, I think what we've got is this kind of, really deadly cocktail on the policing side that basically not only decrease the number of cops, but decrease their willingness, to be proactive. And those are two things that we know are really very closely associated with crime level.
How does the pandemic play in this? And I ask that because, in Washington, D.C., those two girls who carjacked and ended up killing that Muslim Uber Eats driver, they should have been in school. You have 103,000 high schoolers that are still, not a lot of them are not checking in on e-learning, and carjackings are up 238% in Chicago. And some of them, not almost half, though, are in their young teens. One girl as young as 12 carjacked people here in the streets of Chicago. So do you think that plays a part in this?
Yeah, no, I think it does to some degree. I mean, the research on the effect of school closures and crime is somewhat mixed. So what we see is that when school's out, you do see a lot more adolescents involved in more kinds of property crime. That sometimes includes car thefts. Carjackings, there was a bit of a different sort of thing, and this sort of explosion is I think unexpected for a lot of people in carjackings. This is more of a violent crime that requires a significant amount of force or threat of force. One of the things that we do see with school closures is that more kind of interpersonal violent crime, homicides, aggravated assaults tend to go down because there is some evidence showing that schools are actually criminogenic environments, at least in high crime neighborhoods. So, within school hallways, you're more likely to sort of develop beefs that then sort of boil over into fights and then, other kinds of violence. But I do think the pandemic played a role, to some degree with school closures contributing to at least some of the crimes that we're seeing. I also think it played a role in the sense that at least early on, part of the pullback on the part of police might just have been a function of protocols, fear of sort of exposing oneself, to this really harmful disease. We saw the police officers were contracting COVID at much higher rates. And so I think that was, certainly something that came into play, but also the criminal justice system more broadly kind of came to a halt for a while, right? So it took a lot longer to get cases from charging to disposition. You saw a lot of COVID-related prison releases, a lot of COVID-related jail diversions. So this all contributed to the number of sort of offenders on the street rather than behind bars, which I also think played a role. But, that's not the kind of thing that a lot of people who cite the pandemic as a cause are pointing to. Rather, what they like to argue is that, a la AOC, the pandemic sort of created this economic desperation that led people down this path to violent crime that they wouldn't have otherwise gone down. And that's an argument for which I don't see a ton of evidence. I mean, for one thing, if you just, take my home city of New York, for example, and just look at the poverty rate, like the year before New York City had its record high murder year in 1990 with 2,262 murders, the poverty rate was actually slightly lower than it was in 2016, which is the year before we hit a record low for murders, which is just 292 for that year. And of course, during the Great Recession, the national homicide rate declined by 15%, going from 5.7 per 100,000 to 4.8. During that same time, the civilian unemployment rate skyrocketed. It almost doubled from 4.6 to 9.3. So,
that's a bunch of right. Well, of course, it's nonsense. It's coming from the likes of AOC. But look, I mean, first of all, household incomes have gone up during the pandemic because of all the funny money. That's number one, to your point about the poverty rate. Number two, the unemployment spike is driven by women having to go back home and look after kids, and they're not committing very many crimes, particularly violent crimes. And those making $40,000 a year that are grinding it out and trying to climb the ladder. I mean, that's just a bunch of silliness. And frankly, some of the school stuff is too, because as you point out, these schools as sort of sanctuaries of safety and institutions of learning. Well, that is a huge lie that hopefully has been exposed finally to a greater percentage of the population with what they've seen on Zoom calls for those that are even checking in for their Zoom calls or their Zoom classes. I mean, that is all a bunch of nonsense by people holding on to institutions that have been completely, at least based on the evidence, delegitimized during the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The other thing, too, is if you look at just, the economic effects of the pandemic, they were pretty widespread, right? I mean, it's not as if everyone, and this is one of the things that complicates that argument, right? Because the crime increase, we know, as always, is coming from a very small slice of our population. It is concentrated in a very small slice of the country.
Right.
And this is, a much smaller slice than has been affected by the pandemic.
Right. And I mean, let's just be clear here. Those two girls that carjacked that Uber driver in D.C., you think they had some great respect for life and the rule of law when they were in school a year ago, and they just sort of descended into Clockwork Orange in the last year because they're not in school? No. These are kids that got a problem to begin with and violent tendencies to begin with, and you're just seeing the expression of them, and you want to blame it on something that runs concurrent, even though it has no causal link.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing too that went on in the country that I didn't put in the Hill piece, but that I think people ought to know about is that there's been a pretty steady level of decarceration across the country leading up to 2020. If you look at just 2018 and 2019 and look at the number of states in which the prison population was declining, this is a vast majority of the country. You had 38 states cut their prison rolls in 2019, 34 states cut their prison rolls in 2018. And if you just look at the overall level of decarceration in the last 10 years from 2009 to 2019, the prison population across the country dropped almost 20%. This is going to have an effect on things. And I think one of the problems is that the crime increase of 2020 that was coupled with the pandemic, I think the fact that it came alongside the pandemic is clouding people's sort of openness to the possibility that some of these other criminal justice factors might be playing.
Well, and that decarceration is part of it. And now we're getting to the other side of the criminal justice system and the non-prosecution prosecutors, the slap on the hands at most for property crimes aren't real crimes, and so on and so forth. That sort of philosophy among all these big city non-prosecution prosecutors, Kim Foxx, Gasson, Krasner, Bowden in San Francisco, Mosby in Baltimore, and so on and so forth.
That's exactly right. I mean, the progressive prosecutor trend is really something that, I think Americans ought to be troubled by. I mean, we're at a point now in our country where almost 40 million Americans are living in jurisdictions with progressive prosecutors who have, openly dedicated themselves to pursuing decarceration for its own sake. And, if you look at some of the cities in which, these prosecutors are in office, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, under Larry Krasner, the homicide total has gone up every year since he's been in office. And of course, Baltimore recently set its all-time record for homicide rate. And yet Marilyn Mosby is on Twitter right now trying to tell me that things are okay. So, it really is. I mean, I kid you not, she literally just tweeted at me. So it's it really is a kind of strange gaslighting of the United States where you have these people, pursuing these policies that, we know do have a downside risk associated with them, yet no one seems willing to connect the dots between those sorts of policies and approaches and the sort of crime increases that a lot of these jurisdictions have been seeing since before the pandemic year.
Rafael Mangual, Senior Fellow, Deputy Director of Legal Policy at the Manhattan Institute, contributing editor to City Journal as well. Check out his piece in The Hill, which I tweeted out or will tweet out. Cities got deadlier in 2020. Maybe I'll get Marilyn Mosby to respond to me, too. Rafael, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again.
Yep, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper, hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Are you aware that AmericanEagle.com has been designing websites since the internet started? Do you know they've helped companies large and small achieve results that they themselves thought impossible? Today, a well-designed website is an art form. There are no cookie-cutter